All right, what happens when the ancient text of the book of Joshua actually meets the dirt of the ancient Near East? Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are taking Dr. Jeffrey Hudon's incredible lecture and turning it into a real-time detective story. We're going to see exactly how modern archaeology interacts with the biblical narrative of the Israelite conquest of Canaan. If you've ever wondered about the nitty-gritty intersection of ancient history and physical evidence, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to explore where the archaeological dirt beautifully aligns with the historical text, where it seemingly vanishes into thin air, and where it sparks some absolutely fierce scholarly debates. Let's kick things off right here at Mount Nebo in Jordan. It's this breathtaking ridge that just drops off dramatically down into the Jordan Valley. Traditionally, this is the exact spot where Moses stood to view the Holy Land before the Israelites crossed over. When you look out from this vantage point today, you can see the northern shore of the Dead Sea and the distant hill country of Jerusalem. It perfectly sets the geographical stage for the events described in the ancient texts. Now, as Dr. Hudon points out, you can't physically see every single thing the text claims Moses saw from this specific spot, which implies a supernatural element to the ancient account, but it firmly, physically grounds us in the exact landscape where these newcomers prepared to enter Canaan. Now, as we metaphorically cross the Jordan River with them, we immediately hit a massive roadblock in the field of archaeology. Identifying specific ancient peoples like the Jebusites, Amorites, or Perizzites is incredibly difficult. Why? Because during the Late Bronze period, around 1400 BCE, the material culture is practically uniform across the board. Archaeologists find the exact same local Canaanite-style pottery alongside copies of imported Cypriot pottery everywhere they look. This is a huge hurdle, because it's not like you can just dig up a broken jug and say, aha, the Israelites were definitely here. There is simply no clear, distinctive material fingerprint separating one ethnic group from another during this exact window of time. So researchers are forced to rely heavily on architecture, destruction layers, and the texts themselves. So here is our roadmap for this explainer. We'll cover the three main conquest theories: the Jericho Enigma, the missing city of Ai, the smoking gun at Hazor, and finally wrap up with the limits of archaeology. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Three Theories of Conquest. We're going to evaluate the scholarly perspectives on the origins of the Israelites. Because the archaeological record is so tricky to read, academics constantly debate how to historically interpret the book of Joshua. They basically fall into three distinct camps. First up, you've got the unified military conquest theory, championed by early heavyweights like William F. Albright and Yegei Yadin. They treat the book of Joshua as a generally faithful historical record of rapid, sweeping military campaigns. Then you have the peaceful immigration theory, proposed by German scholars who watched how modern Bedouin tribes operated. This suggests the Israelites were actually nomads who gradually and peacefully settled down alongside Canaanite farmers over a long period. And finally, there is the social revolution view. Popularized by George Mendenhall and Norman Gottwald, this Marxist-inspired theory flips the script entirely. It argues the Israelites weren't outsiders at all, but indigenous Canaanites who staged a massive peasant revolt against their elite overlords to create a brand new society. Now, that third idea, the indigenous revolt theory, well, it sparked some serious fireworks. In fact, Dr. Hudon notes that his own advisor, the legendary Israeli archaeologist Dr. Anson Rainey, completely shut it down with this hilarious and memorable quip: "The theory itself is revolting, not the peasants." Rainey and others pointed out massive flaws in the indigenous revolt theory, arguing it just improperly pastes modern geopolitical and Marxist ideologies over ancient texts. Plus, Rainey highlighted strong linguistic and pottery evidence pointing to Israelite origins strictly east of the Jordan River, meaning they absolutely had to be newcomers to the land, not an indigenous uprising. Moving right along to Section 2, the Jericho Enigma. This is a classic case of disputed evidence and intense scholarly conflict. So, Jericho. It is famously the lowest and oldest city on earth, sitting right there at the base of the Jordan Valley. But when we talk about the Israelite conquest, modern archaeology here has produced wildly conflicting interpretations. It's a real roller coaster. Back in the 1930s, British archaeologist John Garstang dug at Jericho and boldly announced he had found the collapsed walls from Joshua's time. Case closed, right? Well, 20 years later, another British archaeologist, Kathleen Kenyon, showed up. She used much more precise stratigraphic techniques, basically reading the dirt like a historical layer cake, and her conclusion was an absolute bombshell. She claimed that during the Late Bronze Age, the time of Joshua, there was virtually no city there at all to conquer. Just some tombs, maybe a few scattered houses, but definitely no walled fortress. So how in the world do we reconcile this massive academic divide?
Well, Dr. Hudon suggests Kenyon's negative findings don't necessarily torpedo the text. You have to remember, Jericho's walls were made of mud brick. The biblical curse on Jericho meant the site was left totally abandoned and exposed to the harsh elements for centuries. That means severe erosion of the late bronze layer is almost guaranteed. Furthermore, it's pretty unthinkable that a site with such a powerful, life-giving water source wouldn't be occupied. Another really solid theory out there suggests the massive Middle Bronze Age walls, which predated Joshua, were simply reused by the Late Bronze inhabitants. In that scenario, the destruction of those reused walls would represent Joshua's conquest. Either way you look at it, Jericho remains this incredibly fascinating, active enigma.
Now on to Section 3, the missing city of Ai. We're investigating the real challenge of negative evidence. Taking us up from the deep Jordan Valley and into the hill country, we arrive at the site of Ai. Fun fact, that name literally translates to the ruin in Hebrew. And if you thought Jericho was tricky, Ai is a genuine headache for traditionalists. Excavations led by Joseph Callaway in the 1960s at Et Tel, which is pretty universally identified as ancient Ai, resulted in a devastating blow. Callaway dug extensively. He found massive, ancient, early bronze ruins from centuries prior, and he found later Iron Age Israelite villages. But right there in the middle, a complete, deafening gap during the exact time of the conquest. This total lack of walls or pottery led Callaway and a lot of others to sadly conclude the biblical account of the Battle of Ai must be entirely mythical. But hold on, because scholar Alan Millard actually pitched a brilliant hypothesis for this missing evidence. Let's think about this. The name literally means the ruin, and the biblical text says the Israelites attacked the ruin. Miller suggests that Ai might not have even been a functioning, lived-in city at the time. Instead, those massive ancient early Bronze Age walls were utilized as a makeshift redoubt. Think of it like a temporary citadel or a stockade hidden inside ancient, crumbling ruins. It was likely used by fleeing Canaanites from the surrounding areas to make a desperate defensive stand against the Israelites. And honestly, this perfectly explains why there's a major battle recorded there, but absolutely zero settled late bronze domestic pottery left behind in the dirt. Which brings us to Section 4, the smoking gun at Hazor. This is where the physical evidence overwhelmingly aligns with the ancient texts. We are leaving the ambiguous sites behind and heading north to Hazor. The biblical text makes a massive claim here. It calls Hazor the head of all those kingdoms and states that Joshua completely destroyed a coalition of northern kings, captured Hazor, and burned this massive city straight to the ground. In fact, it was the only city in that entire northern campaign totally destroyed by fire. But does the archaeological dirt actually back up this fiery claim? Oh, it absolutely does. When Israeli archaeologist Yigal Yadin excavated Hazor, he didn't just find a city, he found an absolute beast of a metropolis. We are talking about a 20-acre upper city and a staggering 180-acre lower city. It was so big that initially scholars honestly thought the lower area was just a giant parking lot for chariots, because it was too incredibly large to be a real city. But Yadin found houses, temples, massive defensive walls, the whole shebang. And the real kicker? Right at that crucial late bronze layer, Yadin uncovered a thick, dramatic layer of ash. He found a Canaanite palace violently destroyed, complete with a heavy basalt offering table literally knocked over and buried face down in the destruction debris. This is the smoking gun. It's undeniable physical evidence of a violent, fiery destruction that powerfully and directly aligns with the historical account. Finally, let's look at Section 5, the limits of archaeology, reconciling the dirt and the text. So we have essentially seen the full spectrum today, right? We've got eroded evidence at Jericho, missing evidence at Ai, and overwhelming, undeniable confirmation at Hazor. And this complex reality of interpreting the dirt is further highlighted by discoveries back down in the hill country. For instance, Israeli archaeologist Adam Zertal surveyed Mount Ebal and found this massive early Iron Age stone structure filled with ash and animal bones, complete with a ramp. Zertal and later scholars like Ralph Hawkins boldly identified this as Joshua's actual altar, perfectly matching the biblical text of Joshua chapter 8. However, other highly esteemed archaeologists fiercely pushed back, arguing the structure is nothing more than an ancient watchtower. The intense debate over these specific stones and bones continues to this very day. And that really drives home Dr. Hudon's point. Archaeology is an incredible tool, but it does have severe limitations. A trowel cannot definitively prove every single line of an ancient text, but an empty trench doesn't definitively disprove one either.
As we've seen, it continually offers fascinating new pieces to this grand historical puzzle. So it leaves us with a thrilling question. If the absence of evidence truly isn't the evidence of absence, what world-changing, history-altering discovery is waiting just beneath the sand for the very next turn of the trowel? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep your curiosity sharp, and I'll see you next time.